everyone, I am Jamie Ruthenberg and you are watching Jamie's Book and a Bite. So today we're going to talk about the art of illustrating a book and how I personally approach creating artwork for books. And then we're going to move into the kitchen and we're going to make the most amazing chocolate cake with chocolate frosting I've ever had in my life. I think it's actually a piece of culinary artwork in itself. And I'm not going to do any fancy piping or decorating on this cake like I did with the carrot cake in the previous episode, because I want to make a cake that is friendly for anyone to decorate. A lot of us don't have a whole lot of time and we want to create something beautiful with minimal effort. And so that's what I'm doing today. This cake is not only incredibly tasting, but it'll be incredibly elegant and beautiful with literally zero effort. So that's cool. And remember, don't forget to check out the bloopers at the end because they're actually kind of fun. You can get all my books that I've talked about at jamieruthenberg.com, as well as Miles himself. You can get him too. Again, he's soft, he's washable, he's baby safe, and he's really adorable. Like I said, I'm not only the author, but the illustrator as well of my own children's book series and actually several other books. I'm actually self-taught. I think I had mentioned this before, but I'm actually self-taught in artwork. All my degrees are actually in English. It's something that is just a natural love of mine. Ever since I was probably about 5 years old, all I wanted to do was draw. On a rainy day, kind of like today, actually, on a rainy day when a lot of kids will watch movies or play with their blocks or Legos or whatever else, I would sit and I would sketch. I would draw all day long. And no one would ever ask me to do this. I would just naturally wanted to do this. I was naturally drawn to it. That was a pun not intended, but pretty good. And a little fun fact, Miles is actually a character I used to draw all the time. I created when I was very little. So naturally, when it came time to think of who the main character of this book series would be, it was Miles. Miles had been with me my whole life. And it's funny, I often tell students at schools, when I speak at schools, that the one line from the movie Babe, I don't know if any of you have seen Babe, it's one of my favorite movies. He says, "Little ideas that tickle and nag and refuse to go away should never be ignored, for in them lie the seeds of destiny." And I used to get goosebumps at that. And this is well before I created a children's book series. We should really think about those things that we naturally love, or those things that never leave us. Because usually that's where your unique gifts and talents lie. Even as adults, we should always be mindful of that. So as I've probably mentioned before, I use a number 2 pencil and watercolor paint. And I love the fact that I use a number 2 pencil, because I like to say that when I speak at schools, again, because children have access in schools to a number 2 pencil and watercolor paint. So watercolors, I love watercolor paint because I love the feel and the flow of it and its softness, and it achieves that feeling that I'm looking for. So the first thing I do when creating a book is obviously write the manuscript, but in the manuscript the art process actually starts as well, because I actually write out in a different color font the description of the artwork in words for each 2-page section of the book. The artwork is half of the story. It tells the story to the child, especially children who are learning how to read. Once the manuscript is done, that's when I actually begin to draw. The last book that I just released, Miles Finds a New Friend, had 28 pieces of artwork, and I drew all of them first. I didn't draw and then paint and then draw. I drew everything first and laid it all out, because once you add paint to a piece, there's no going back. You have to start over. And I like to have them all drawn so I can go back and change and revise. As I do my writing, I do with my artwork as well. And so I go back and revise and change things. I can, erase some things, add in, and I'm also changing the manuscript as I go along, because everything's kind of in a revision mode throughout. But once everything is how I want it, that's when I begin to paint. The painting process is a magical process to me. There's nothing like seeing that picture really come to life. And there are certain effects you can't achieve with drawing. It has to be through paint. Snow is one thing that I always say is a magical process in terms of painting, because it's the last thing you do to a picture if it has snow in it. For example, in Miles and the Best Birthday Gift, it's a winter setting and a lot of the outdoor scenes have snow in them. So it's always the most magical moment when I would add that snow to the picture, and it just, I don't know how else to say it, it's just magic. So once everything is painted, that's when the technical aspect comes into play, scanning, desktop formatting, etc. And I'll tell you, that is an art in itself. no doubt. But that's for another day, because that's kind of a long, that's a long discussion as well. So speaking of Miles and the best birthday gift, the recipe we're going to do today, it was actually made in Miles and the Best Birthday Gift, and it's on the back cover, and I haven't made it yet. I've saved it. It probably is one of my favorite, if not the most favorite recipe that I have. And I absolutely love it, and so do most of the people in my life. We're always finding some excuse for me to have this cake to bring to a party or whatever. If you follow me on Facebook or Instagram or social media platforms, you probably have seen this cake in some form or another. And it's usually all decorated with special piping and decorating techniques. But today we're gonna do a very simple decoration. And I tell you, when people look at this beautiful cake you made, they're gonna think you're an artist. So come with me. So here we are in the kitchen, and we'll start out with the cake. I have the oven at 350 degrees, it's preheating, and I have sprayed 2 8-inch pie pans with, and you can use 9-inch by the way as well, with non-stick spray with flour in it for baking. This is the best invention in the 20th century. No joke. So just make sure that you spray them very generously, both the pans. Then, this is extremely easy cake, by the way, and it's very delicious. It's extremely moist as well. It's very easy. First you put all of the dry ingredients in your bowl. In this bowl, I've actually already added 2 cups of sugar, 1 3/4 cups all-purpose flour, 3/4 cups Italian unsweetened cocoa powder, 1½ teaspoons baking powder, 1½ teaspoons baking soda, and 1 teaspoon salt. Okay, so all the dry ingredients are in the bowl. I'm actually going to give it a mix for a second just to let it all kind of mix together. One important point to make is the cocoa powder in this recipe is incredibly important, because that's really what's going to flavor your cake. I use cocoa powder that's actually imported in from Italy. And Italian chocolate in general tends to be a lot deeper in flavor and more intense in flavor, and I love that kind of chocolate. So you use whatever cocoa you love the most, but I'll tell you, this is fabulous cocoa. I'll actually put the information down below with the recipe information and where I get it in case you're interested. To the dry ingredients, then we add all of our wet ingredients, except for the very last ingredient. There's a cup of boiling water that goes into this at the very end, but you wait, we don't put that in right away. So what we are going to add to our bowl and I'm telling you, this is such an easy recipe, because you have all your dry ingredients and then you just add all of your wet and you mix it for 2 minutes. There's nothing to it. So to this bowl, we're going to add 2 eggs, 1 cup of whole milk, it's important that it's whole, 1/2 cup vegetable oil, and 2 teaspoons pure vanilla extract. Okay, so all of the wet ingredients is added to the dry. This is when you actually have to mix it for 2 whole minutes on about medium speed. This is where it's nice to have a standing mixer, because you can walk away for a minute, but what I do is I time this by the fact that it takes 2 minutes to boil the 1 cup of water, that last ingredient. It takes 2 minutes to boil the water in a Pyrex cup. So I kind of time the 2 minutes along with how long it takes to boil the water. I'm going to put this up a bit, and I'll see you in a minute or 2. So okay, it's been 2 minutes. Mixed it up really well. At this point is when you actually add in the warm water. You can either you're supposed to stir it in. I sometimes will put it in slowly in here and just go very slowly, because if you turn on your standing mixer after adding an entire cup of water, it's going to splash all over you in the kitchen. So just be really careful. I'm going to actually try to do this very carefully, little bit by little bit. Whoops. And this is why normally I just stir it. Okay. Then what I usually do is I finish it off with a hand mixing, just to make sure everything is nice and mixed in there. Ooh, it smells amazing. This isn't a very, very loose batter. It'll be very liquidy. It should look like that. It's exactly how it should look. And warning, because it is such a loose batter, I would not make cupcakes with this. I've tried that once and it was a disaster. They rose up, but they were still so liquidy that basically it was a fountain all over my oven. So I wouldn't recommend doing that, but the cake is so amazing. So now we pour our batter evenly into our sprayed pans. Alright, so now I've poured them evenly into the pans. I usually give them a good, release some of the air bubbles. These two cakes are going to go into a 350 degree oven for 30 to 40 minutes, depending on whether you're using 8 or 9-inch pans, and also depending on the heat of your oven, because ovens tend to vary. Some are hotter, some are cooler. So just keep an eye on it, especially once you hit around 30 minutes. As long as you cook it to the point where a cake tester comes out clean, we're good. You don't want to overbake them though, because the beauty of these cakes is that they're incredibly moist. But you want to make sure they're cooked. You don't want to serve raw cake, but you want it to be moist. Once they're done, I let them rest in the pan for a good 20 minutes or so. And then I kind of run a knife around them and get them out of the pan and let them do the rest of their cooling. All right, I'm going to get these in the oven, and I will see you in a few minutes. Okay, we've come to my favorite part. The cakes have baked, they're cooling, and it's time to make the frosting, my favorite thing in the world. So I find that there's two schools of thought when it comes to the art of eating cake. There's one school, and those people tend to want to eat the cake portion. So a lot of times you'll give somebody like this a piece of cake, and you'll see when they're done that they leave this border of frosting around it. I don't quite understand those people. I'm just joking. I can understand if you love cake. There's another school of thought that see cake as a vehicle to frosting, and that's me. I love frosting so much, and I love this cake. What I love about this cake is it's very dense, it's extremely moist, so it kind of gives someone like me the best of both worlds. The same cocoa that I used in the cake, I have in the frosting. And again, you really want to use a really nice cocoa because it really does, it's all the flavor. What I'm going to add to the cocoa here is 3/4 of a cup melted butter, and I melt it so that it mixes really nicely. So you add this in. So I use a handheld mixer to do the frosting. I've also done it on my standing mixer. Either way is fine, but a mixer really is helpful. So you want to mix this together first. Well, but don't let it go too high or you'll be wearing your cocoa, which I just almost did. And make sure you really scrape down the bowl. Alright, so I mixed in the vanilla. Then what you want to do is you want to intermittently add the last two ingredients, which is 1.5 cups of heavy whipping cream, and then 5.5 to 6 cups of powdered sugar. So what you do is I'm first going to add a portion of the heavy cream, not all of it, just about maybe half, 1/3 to half. Mix it in, and then add some powdered sugar, mix that in, and go back and forth until all the ingredients are in. One really important thing to note is you don't want to beat this too much. If you do use a hand mixer like I am, you want to use it at a slow speed because you don't want to whip the cream to the point where it's whipped cream, and that can happen. So now I'm adding a good couple cups of the powdered sugar. In fact, I'm going to add a little more of the heavy whipping cream as well. I'll add the rest of the heavy whipping cream. It takes a little bit of time, but it's worth it. Last bit of powdered sugar. These are the prize. That is really good. All right, well, it's time to frost the cake. If your frosting was a little too thick, you can add a little more heavy cream to it. If it's a little too loose, add more powdered sugar. It's very forgiving that way. So I have on a cake pedestal the first layer of cake, and what I do is I put little pieces of wax paper all around the cake so that it catches anything that might fall into the cake plate. If you didn't freeze your cakes, I know that if some of you who have seen my other episodes, I often will freeze the cake and then bring it out. If you don't freeze the cake and you're doing it the same day, just make sure that your cakes are completely cooled, because there's nothing worse than putting frosting on a warm cake and everything just becomes a melted sliding mess. And it will do that. It's happened to me. So just make sure they're nice and cool. So I will put a big dollop on top of the middle of the cake for the center frosting, and spread it around with, again, my favorite tool. You can just use a butter knife if you don't have a offset spatula. These are great. They're a great investment, and they're very, very useful for a lot of different things in the kitchen. So we just spread that around evenly, and this will glue on the top layer. Then we're going to take that second layer and we're going to set the bottom side that's really flat. That part goes up. There we go. And now comes the fun part of mounding the top with all kinds of luscious frosting. As I've done in other cakes you've seen, and I always do, is I start at the top and then I bring the frosting over to the sides. And that's what I'm going to do. So here we go. Okay, you're gonna laugh. I had to put this in the fridge because my cake actually started sliding away. I didn't realize that the cakes were not completely cooled. I just went against my own advice. So I made the sides smooth just because this cake was having a hard time, or I was having a hard time with the cake, I guess you could say. So you could just do swirlies all over the sides. I did them straight, but on the top I'm just doing these little dips. I mean, this is so easy. You just take a butter knife or your little spatula and you just go around and make little swirlies and little spikes on the top. And then what we're gonna do is shave chocolate on the top. So simple, with your vegetable peeler. So all you do is take a vegetable peeler and a bar of chocolate. And actually, ideally, I like to have a thicker bar of chocolate. It's easier to use the peeler on it, but you can use a thinner. And you just run it across it. And it just makes these little chocolate curls. It looks very professional. People will be like, wow, fancy. And you just do it to however much you want on it. I kind of like a lot. I think it looks really pretty. And I've kept those pieces of wax paper on the bottom still. I've not taken them off yet because this is kind of going everywhere. Well, hi everybody, here it is, the chocolate cake with chocolate frosting. I don't want to move it because it's actually melting. I'm not kidding you. This is the one time I didn't use frozen cakes. A good case in point. It's funny because a lot of times I freeze the cakes and then bring them out and the frosting just chills to the cake so nicely. And today I actually didn't do that. I didn't have the time. It's melting all over and sliding all over. But I want you to take a look at it. I'm not going to move it around. The piece of cake is beautiful. You can see the little chocolate curls on the top. So pretty. So I need to take a taste of this. I have not tasted yet. I've been eating frosting galore, to be totally honest with you, but I haven't actually tasted the cake. So I'm going in. It's so moist. That is so good. That is so good. And this is gonna be my dinner. No joke. There are no words to how good this cake is. Just trust me, you need to make it. Make it. It's so easy and it's so yummy. I need more. It's unreal. Holy cow. It's so moist. I know a lot of people don't like that word. And so flavorful and so deep and rich in flavor. I promise you, you need to make this. The recipe will be down below the video screen along with the links to get the cocoa. And remember, all the books I've talked about in the other episodes and Miles is available on JamieRuthenberg.com. So thanks for hanging with me. I'm gonna eat more of this cake, and until next time, the cake in the so that way it starts. Well, no. In this, I really. I use cocoa powder. I don't know what I use. Little, yeah. And this is when you actually have to mix it for two full minutes. Easy for me to say. The camera's on. I totally forgot. Then we're gonna take, oops. Then my phone. Who is calling me right now?